we're just getting started, so let's bring in our guy, Fair Territory star, FT Insider, the Athletics Insider, Ken Rosenthal, with us right now for all this juicy news. Ken, great to have you on. Want to get your take. And also, we didn't get to this yet. Should we ask AJ if he was in consideration for the front office role?
No.
We can get to that later. First of all, one thing that needs to be said right off the top was how surprising this was, considering Jerry Reinsdorf's history, both with the Bulls and with the White Sox. He is considered perhaps the most loyal owner to employees in his sport, in either sport. And that has been his hallmark. He has stuck with Ken Williams and Rick Hahn for this long. Ken Williams has been with the organization more than 30 years. Rick Hahn, more than 20 years. So for him to do this, obviously he felt a change was necessary. Now, getting to the idea of Chris Getz and Dayton Moore. Dayton Moore is an accomplished general manager. Of course, he won a World Series. He also was Pedro Grifal's boss in Kansas City. Pedro Grifal is the current manager of the White Sox. But if Chris Getz is going to be the general manager of this team, I have some serious questions. Chris Getz is running a farm system that even after all the White Sox trades during the deadline, still ranks only 22nd according to Baseball America. They made all those trades, got all those prospects. They're still only 22nd. It's not like there is a fountain of players coming from that farm system. So what is Chris Getz's qualification here? I have no idea. He has not been a GM. He has not been anything more than a farm director. He is in the inner circle, I guess. But you know what? The White Sox need to get away from what they've done in the past. They need to bring in some fresh ideas, a fresh individual to run their team. I'm with AJ. When I saw that the statement said a person would be in place by the end of the season, my immediate reaction was, yes, they've got someone in mind. And Bob Nightingale did report Chris Getz is probably the guy. There are so many others out there you can look at right now, not Dave Dombrowski, Kim Ng, current executives. I'm talking about James Click, who won a World Series with the Astros last season. I'm talking about John Daniels, who might not be ready to get back in after the Rangers fired him last year, but he has been to the World Series as well. There are others, too, assistant GMs, people all over the sport who would come to your organization and bring you fresh ideas. The White Sox have been arguably too insular. Well, if they hire Chris Getz, it's another insular move. And it's one that is going to raise a lot of eyebrows and get people scratching their heads throughout the sport, which seems to be a White Sox tradition.
It makes sense, Ken. I mean, listen, there's so much to this story that doesn't make sense from the timing of it. Kenny and Rick were on the field for batting practice yesterday. Had no idea. Had no clue they were getting fired. They get fired between 4:30 and 7 p.m. How does that, explain that process to me, right? I played with Chris Getz. I like Chris Getz a lot. This is not a personal knock on Chris Getz at all. He has been the farm director / whatever the title they've given him for 7 years with the White Sox now. Find me an impact player they've developed. Find me a player that hasn't been a first rounder or a high pick that they've developed out of nowhere to become a major league fixture. You look at their roster, it's all guys that Rick Hahn and Kenny Williams traded for or signed as free agents that have had an impact on them the last few years. Because if you look at
number one picks like Vaughn.
Well, and number one pick. Andrew Vaughn, Gavin Sheets. Yes, I get that part of it. But they haven't found the diamond in the rough to make an impact at the major league level. They haven't developed guys from a 12th round pick, right? Boom, 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 worked them up the ladder. Oh, man, this guy can contribute even as a platoon guy. There's not those players. And Chris Getz is in charge of this.
And keep in mind also, AJ, that's a much different job than the general manager job. The general manager job is much broader, involves much more. You're overseeing the farm department, the amateur scouting, the professional scouting, the international scouting, all of the administrative details, the analytics, everything falls under your purview. So you've got to be someone capable of doing that. And listen, no one knows if Chris Getz or anyone else for that matter is capable until they get the job. That's fair for anybody who is a first-time GM. But for a team like this, a team that needs so much work to be done, I would say any first-time GM would be a risk. Any assistant GM they hired, let's say, from the Dodgers who hasn't been a GM, that guy or that woman would be a risk too. So from that perspective, if this is the choice, I do not understand it. They are not without hope. And I wrote this today. I spoke with 5 executives last night from other teams. Their view of the White Sox is, 1, Chicago is a great city. 2, Reinsdorf is loyal to his employees. And 3, you're playing in the American League Central, the weakest division. You're in the biggest market. You've got probably the most money of any of those teams, or at least the resources to do some things. This should be a sleeping giant. And yet you don't know, or you shouldn't have much faith that the White Sox are going to turn it around and make themselves into that giant because of these kinds of decisions that have been made over the years.
Okay, so now I'm going to take off my foul territory hat. Bloop. And I'm going
Nice
to put
hair.
my white. Yeah, thank you. And I'm going to put my White Sox fan hat on, okay? As a White Sox fan, why should I be excited about this hire? There was so much excitement on Twitter, X, Instagram, whatever social media platform you are about, okay, it finally happened. And again, I talked to Kenny Williams. I've talked to, said, Kenny, I appreciate, how much respect I have for you and what you did. You brought me to Chicago, so thank you. Brought me a World Series, okay? I never want to see anybody get fired, no matter what your feelings are for them. It's not where I am. But as a White Sox fan, I'm thinking, okay, this happened after all this time. All this time. Kenny's been there for 30 years. Rick's been there for 20 plus years. They're going to go out and they're going to make a home run hire, a splash hire that makes people say, okay, we're turning it around. And then they go to the third in command, basically. Organizations are leveled differently, but you have the GM, the president, or whatever, Kenny's executive vice president. And then you had
GMs too. Yeah.
But Getz was like assistant GM, right? He was assistant
he's in
GM,
the hierarchy.
Director of player. He's in the top 5-ish, 10-ish of the organization. Okay, great. But then you go get Dayton Moore, okay? And then you have Pedro Grifol. Is this the 2019 Royals we're looking at here? I just don't understand. If I'm a fan, and everyone knows I'm a fan of the White Sox, why am I excited about this hire? Now listen, I hope they do great things because I want the White Sox to do well, but this is not a sexy hire, not an exciting hire, from the outside looking in, again, this is as my fan, and I want them to do well. This is not a home run hire for a lot of people. It is a typical White Sox, Jerry Reinsdorf, love you, Jerry. Let's just be loyal to the people and just take the next person and put them there because Jerry knows them and I'm comfortable talking to him every day, and we'll go from there. And then I have Tony in my ear saying, oh, I love Dayton Moore. You should bring him on board too.
AJ, you just said it. This would be, if it happens, a Jerry Reinsdorf hire. And that makes it all the more curious. And Jerry Reinsdorf, as the owner of the team, is entitled to do whatever he wants. But as John Greenberg wrote in The Athletic today, the guy who should be fired right now is Jerry Reinsdorf himself, because he has overseen all of this, and he is the architect, ultimately the one in command, and this is where they are. So you're absolutely right. If you're a fan and you're hearing the news today that the likely people to run this team are Chris Getz and Dayton Moore, you're probably not too excited. You're probably wondering, well, what vision of theirs is going to be different than the vision we've seen already. And I'd be more comfortable if it was Dayton Moore as the head guy, the president of baseball operations, and Chris Getz maybe as the general manager below him. I don't know if that's going to be the structure or if it's going to be as we think, Getz atop with Dayton Moore at his side. But Dayton Moore at least has done this. And that's my problem here. I don't know Chris Getz very well. And of course, I'm not saying this in a personal manner, but just look at the record, what he has accomplished as farm director or not accomplished, and what he has done as a front office executive. He hasn't been in this role. So again, I'll say it one more time. Not to say that a first-time general manager cannot succeed. That's absurd. Of course, a first-time general manager can succeed. Everyone in this job is a first-time general manager at one point. At the same time, in this organization's evolution, where they are now, they need someone to figure out the farm system, to patch together the major league club. They have some pieces. Luis Robert Jr., Dylan Cease, and a few others. Andrew Vaughn's one, maybe Eloy. They've got some guys to build around, but they have to do it, and they have to do it in a more efficient, better way. This organization needs basically an entire upgrade in terms of analytics and infrastructure. You need someone who has done this job, who can come in and start snapping his fingers or her fingers and saying, all right, here we go. I'm not seeing that happening with the current people that they're talking about, at least with Getz, if he's at the top.
Is it plausible that they could start trading more guys off? They allowed all these other trades. Is it plausible that we would see that, or are they going to keep the guys that they've kept? They've been called, everyone's been called out of the system, and now they're going to add to it. Which is more plausible? Getting rid of these guys they have, or this offseason, hey, I'll sign another Benintendi type, or is this a 3 to 4 year rebuild?
Eric, I'm going to give you a bit of a circular answer. When I covered the Orioles for the Baltimore Sun way back, it was hard to think along with Peter Angelos because he would do kind of the opposite of what was logical. The White Sox, as we're discussing, often do the opposite of what is logical. So the logical thing, in my opinion, is if you're firing your top 2 executives, you clearly want the team to go forward now and build back up again. Jerry Reinsdorf is 87. I can't imagine he wants to go into even more of a rebuild. They just came out of one. So my guess is that, yes, they are going to take those core pieces and add to them and try to supplement what they have and try to do some different things. Am I convinced of that? Am I certain of it? Let's put it this way. I wrote a column last night listing people that I thought could be potential White Sox GM candidates. Chris Getz wasn't on that list because I didn't believe that they would stay internal. Now it appears they are staying internal. Again, hard to think along with Jerry Reinsdorf.
But isn't this the easy hire? I think what Bob said is that Dayton Moore is going to be the president, Getz is going to be the GM. So I guess Dayton Moore will oversee.
That I would understand more. That's fine.
That obviously makes more sense.
Yes.
But this seems like, I mean, again, we've talked about it. Like you're saying, like what, they're going to go out and add to this. Well, who are they going to add? Because the free agent crop this year, they need pitching. It ain't great in pitching wise. They're not going to sign Shohei. I mean, they're going to have to trade people.
Well, hold on. There are pitchers available. The market is deeper in pitchers this offseason than it is in hitters. But it's more than that. It is making shrewd trades. It's also waiver claims and Rule 5 picks and all of the different ways that you can get players that teams employ now. Go look at the Mariners bullpen, for instance. A bunch of guys that really were not big names, were not big trade pieces. They were waiver claims and other kinds of freely available talent. That is what an organization needs to do, in addition to spending money on free agents and drafting and developing and working the international market. You've got to find players on the margins. White Sox have not done a very good job of that.
Well, who was in charge of that?
Rick Hahn and Kenny Williams.
And?
Jerry Reinsdorf. I mean, what are you asking here?
Chris Getz.
Chris Getz is not in charge of
developing players.
That kind of thing. Developing players, absolutely.
Yes, he is, 100%. And he goes around and sees players in the minor leagues, and he tells them, hey, this guy's in the minor leagues. We need to get him, right?
No, that's not really his role. His role is to develop their own talent internally. Yes.
Okay. Well, you said, but development's going to be a big thing, I feel like, for the White Sox because, we know Jerry. Like, you can say the surprise and this and that, but Jerry's not going to spend a ton of money. He already did that. It didn't work when he got La Russa. He brought in Lynn and Graveman and all, Hendricks and Joe Kelly. Like, the list goes on and on, right? Jerry's not going to do that again. So how are they going to have to get the players? Trades and developing. And they haven't done and again, this is just the fan side of me. Under Chris Getz, they haven't developed players to a point where when they come, you look at organizations, you look at like Tampa, they bring up dudes and they're like, damn, these dudes are ready to go. They lose Wander Franco, Basabe comes up and you're like, okay, this kid ain't bad. He's ready to go, right? The Cardinals, they always call up these guys and say what you want about them, but they're usually ready when they get there. It's the White Sox. Oscar Colas was supposed to be the guy. He had to go to AAA, and I get it happens, but he still doesn't look ready, right? There hasn't been a guy in the last, other than, even Andrew Vaughn, right? He was a first-round pick. He was third overall. He's been good. He's been serviceable.
He should be good.
Yeah, exactly. But he should be your third overall pick. You should be a guy you're like, oh, man, this is a core guy for the next 10 years, right? But I'm just looking at it from the outside, and you're like, who have they come up with under this regime who they just took the guy who was in charge of the development, and now you're going to put him in charge of everything? Who has come up and done that? And to me as a fan, this is just me as a fan, it hasn't happened.
Well, there's another side of this as well, too, and he's a frequent guest on this show, Lance Lynn. We're talking about major league coaching and development and all the things that go into it, analytics. How is it that Lance Lynn statistically is one of the worst pitchers in baseball, ERA, home runs allowed, with the White Sox? He goes to Los Angeles with the Dodgers, and suddenly, voila, he's back to being the old Lance Lynn, if not better.